Go ahead and sign in. I'm going to create our repository. Again, this is called first web form. Okay. Let's go ahead and snatch this statement right here. Paste that in. We'll do get remote dash v. It shows that we have that. Let's go ahead and do create a README in there. For those of you using Mac, you can just say echo the first web form. If you're using Windows, you're going to have to open up Notepad and in that directory create a README, okay? And if you want to see what that looks like inside of a README, you can do VI, and there is our README file. Okay. Do get add dot get commit dash m first commit to repository, right? Next we need to push this to the other branch, but let's go ahead and make sure we're on the main branch first. So we're going to say get main branch, and if we do get branch, we can see we're on the main branch now. We've already added the remote, so let's copy this, and I believe this will fail because it's going to ask for credentials and we don't have it, so we're getting a 403 error, right? All right, so in order to do that, we're going to go back and do a get set remote, grab all of that information, right? Including your, let's clear this out first. Okay. And then we need to specify the repository, which was what? First web form.get. Hit enter. Okay. Now let's clear this out first. We're going to go ahead and do a get push origin main. Now that should succeed because we're using our token. This should be owed hat to everyone here now, right? Everyone understands what we've done so far? Okay. So do a get fetch origin, get pull origin. We're up to date. If we go back to our GitHub repository and look at this, we should have our README file that we set up. Okay, so we're good to go so far. Let's go back now to Visual Studio Code. We're going to open a folder and we're going to go into our first web form, open that folder. We have our README. So we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call this, we're going to create a new file. And if we're looking at the assignment, what's the name of our file? First web form.html. Do you all know why we're using this name instead of index.html? This is when you submit your code to 000 web host or your AWS account. Remember that the default page is the index.html. So we're not going to try to overwrite previous assignments. We're going to create a new HTML file. And then when you turn this in, your assignment, you're going to give the web server host name plus the HTML file. Okay, that'll be the full full HTML. All right, so next we need to do what? Allow Emmett to create all of our documents. And for the title, I'm going to say first web form. Okay, I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to my terminal, clear, do git add dot get. Okay, remember committing it right now only commits it to our local repository. So now we have to push it to the remote. So git push origin. Git push origin is going to take all of our local commits that have been staged, and now it's going to push those up to the remote repository. And you can see the work that it's actually doing here now. Okay. So just to validate or verify, we'll go over here and we'll press first web form again, and there is our initial page, right? Okay, going back, let's talk about our first web form. Would someone like to do me a favor and hit the light over there, just on one side of the room so it appears better on the screen? When we're talking about web forms are exactly what you would expect. When you enrolled in NMC, you probably had to fill out some paper forms, right? And when you went to sign up for classes, you probably had to fill out a digital web form. Is that correct for most of you? And so the web form, it kind of eases that process. You're not messing around with you filling out something on paper, handing it to your admissions advisor, and then they turn around and typing it into the computer to get you entered. What it does is it speeds up that process. So let's talk a little bit about the parts of a web form. Well, when we create a form, just for our own benefit first, I'm just going to create an H1 and say my first web form, okay? And just so we can see our work, go ahead and open this page in your browser, okay? Now, with our H1 in place, we're going to use a special tag, and this is called the form tag. And you'll notice right away that Visual Studio Code wants to help you and say, well, do you want this to be a post or do you want it to be a get? For right now, just leave it as a basic form. And we have a couple of different things available here. We have the open form and we have the close form, closing form tag. And in the form, we have an action. So let's run through some of the attributes that we have for our form. Well, one of the attributes that you have is called the method. And the method is set to take certain types of HTTP verbs. HTTP is a protocol. It stands for Hypertext Transfer blah 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 transfer protocol. I'm getting tongue-tied this afternoon. Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and there are certain verbs that the protocol makes use of. And so, for example, if we went out to the web and just type in HTTP verbs and did a search, right away we could probably look here at the Mozilla site and see what these request methods are. And we can see that there is get, there is head, there's post, there's put, there's delete, connect, options, trace, and patch. Now, the ones that you're going to use probably the most are going to be get and post. By far, you'll use these the most. However, if you're needing and you get curious and you're wondering, well, what are the other possible HTTP methods that I could use, request methods? Well, these are the verbs that are used. And you could use head, Head method asks for a response identical to get. Well, what does get do? A get method requests a representation of a specified resource. Using get should only retrieve data, right? Why does it say should only retrieve data? Anyone know why they're saying that? Because oftentimes in a get, you may feel tempted to use the values that are submitted for a get to save those values. The HTTP methods, these verbs, these are the recommended usages of them. Okay, and just like everything that it's recommended to do, sometimes people don't end up following the recommendations, right? You take out your Honda Eclipse and you go right out on the beach. It's not recommended, right? Because what happens? You get stuck in the sand, or you decide that you're going to take, what's a better example? Take your Prius and go mudding, right? You can do it, but you shouldn't do it, right? This is the same thing here. These verbs are not, if you use them, it isn't going to tell you no, you can't. But it's the recommendation that we all use the same words for what they mean, right? We don't change our language arbitrarily because we don't like how they sound anymore. Words have meaning, and in IT, the words you use semantically must always mean what they mean. Otherwise, they become useless, right? It's the same in every part of our grammar and our speech. If I was speaking Tagalog to you and I said, oh, my foot is tobig, right? You'd be going, well, his foot is water? What? Right? You use the words for what they mean. You don't try to confuse them because it makes everybody else confused and we all get nervous about what you're talking about. Meaning is important, all right? I couldn't say that enough. That's a rant for another day. So make sure you learn these. But by far, the two verbs that you will use the most are get and post. Now, there is another, later on, after you take Java and after you get out into the real world, say you decide you really do want to do software development and programming, there are the RESTful APIs. They use these verbs heavily, and they mean specific things. So for example, if I'm wanting to save some data, brand new data, I'll use a post. If I'm wanting to add some data, I'll use a put verb. If I'm wanting to remove data, I'll use a delete verb, because the RESTful API itself should reflect the type of action underneath the hood that's going on, right? So these are the verbs. Okay, so let's go back to our form. In general, if you want to send information that you want to keep more restricted in knowledge, then you need to use post. Post will submit the data in a more hidden fashion. Now, this is especially important if you're over here on your website. You'll notice that this thing here has a padlock on it, right? And we inherently look at that padlock and we think, okay, well, it's secure. If I submit information and it's submitted in this packet through post, that padlock is going to tell me that it's going to encrypt it. And there's not going to be somebody out there watching the information pass and go, oh, look, there's someone's social security number. There's someone's credit card number, right? You want to keep all of your personally identifiable, valuable information that you don't want the public to use in general. You want to use it within a post only. And you want to make sure that your website already has a valid certificate. Okay? If you're going to get information from something on the web, Can you tell me what verb you would use for getting information? I gave it away, didn't I? Yeah. You're going to use the get, okay? So between the two, get and post, these are your two most important. The other thing to remember is that a get typically sends the information in the URL itself. So for example, let's go to DuckDuckGo since it's my favorite secure browser. Looking for web developer jobs. Notice what it posted up here in the top. We have a query string, the Q, which is the parameter that says, hey, here's the key, and then the equal sign, and this is everything after the equal sign is going to be the value. And so everything all the way up to this ampersand symbol is the value to this key. And then after it, we have an ampersand, which says, okay, now the next parameter, this next key is a T, and the value is Chrome, and then you have another one. You guys see that? The ampersand, and then you have another value, another key, and that equals that value. This is called a query string. And the query strings are always identified first by the question mark. So if you're an astute hacker and you understand how query strings work, you might think, well, I'll do some query string manipulation here, and I'll add in some other interesting information. Let's use the same letter, T, because T is going to overwrite that one, right? T. And I'll say Firefox. Don't know if it's going to work. If I hit enter, and look what it did. It overwrote the previous browser extension. Now it's thinking I'm using Firefox. Okay? So think about the subtleties between this. Obviously, a GET request, because that's what this essentially is. It's a GET request. Uses query strings, and query strings are easily manipulated. Right? GET requests are only for getting information. So you don't want to write your page in such a way where someone could use a GET request, a query string, to submit data. Go ahead and hold out your hand now. Everyone hold out your hand. Okay? Slap it. Don't do that. Okay? All right. I'm telling you this because this is important. Don't use GET request to submit valuable information. Because someone could come along and think, you know what, I'm going to try to subvert their web server or their form and get in my own information. So GET request, query string manipulation is always a problem. All right? Only use posts for submitting information. Okay? So let's go back, and we're going to use a post here. Okay? Now, I'm not saying you can't use gets, okay? But remember, gets should only draw information. It's only for retrieving. Posts are for like updating data, sending it, okay? All right, so let's look at some of the other options on the method. So we have the method. This is our HTTP verb. We're going to use the post. And we're going to get into this more in a second. We also have the action, and the action is going to relate to the URL that we're submitting the action against. Now, I've already given you an action that I want you to use. Okay? And let me go back to it again, and we're going to copy that. This site uses a common gateway interface. It's some C++ they've written to grab the data and just spit it back out again to say this is what you submitted. So we're going to use that for our actions. Okay, so we'll put that in there. So that is our method, and then that is our action. Well, what are the other types of things that are available on a HTTP form? Let's pull up something here and take a look. HTTP form. It's running slow today. All right, so we have the action attribute. We've talked about that one. This one is using this methodology, right? I believe when you do not specify a method, the default is post. I believe that is the default. Okay? All right, the other attribute you have is called the target. So let's go back here and look at the target. So you use the target attribute, whoops, just like so. And the target attribute can use either blank, parent, self, or top. So say that you have a site and you're going to reinterpret the data that's submitted on the same site. Meaning you don't want to send them out to another page. Or meaning that the data isn't going out to another page. In that sense, you want to use self. Self is going to return back into the same page. It'll overwrite the same location, right? If, however, you're looking at saying, you know what, I don't know where this is coming from and I don't want them to lose the context of my current page because there's a workflow that I have on my current page and this is going to take them out to a new site that I don't control, then it's appropriate to use blank. Open up a new tab, send them to another place so that you don't lose your original website, right? Or you can use parent, top, or a frame name. So have we talked about iframes yet? All right, for fun of this, we're going to go ahead and use an iframe. And what we'll do is we'll say iframe, ID, and this is the CGI results. Okay. If we save this at this point, go back to our page and refresh it, all we have here is this blank iframe. That's what this is. It's the iframe. If we inspect it, we should be able to see that we have this iframe right here, and an iframe is basically it's a browser within a browser. We've got an HTML page within an HTML page, and it's isolated. So when we tell it in a moment the target, we're going to say the iframe location, which is CGI results. Let's validate, make sure I'm giving you the right information here. You got to use a name on it. So I'm just going to give it the same name as the ID. So if we look at the type of attributes, we have the target, we have the action, we've talked about the method. We know that we can use get. Here we're going to use post. What else? We can put autocomplete on a form. Do you guys know what autocomplete does? Huh?
Completes it for you?
Yeah. If you visited a site before, and you may notice that every time you visit the site, it seems to always remember who you are. That's because autocomplete is set on the form. Now I believe autocomplete is a Boolean attribute in of itself. So if you have it listed without the parameter, without the key value pair, it automatically understands it to be on. But we're explicitly stating it, and if we want it turned off, then we just say off. Other types of things you can use is the non-validate. You notice here that this is a Boolean attribute. So when the non-validate is present, it just means that the form should not be validated on submit, right? And we'll be getting into some examples of those later on. Other types of attributes, we have the character set that can be accepted. This could become important if you're using non-English language as your form. So for example, if you're using a character set like Russian or Korean or Chinese, does Tagalog have non-English character sets like Chamorro does? Chamorro has like the little little circle on it.
I don't think so.
It doesn't have it? So it all depends on the language you're using. Make sure that you specify the right character set. By default, UTF-8 is the default character set. There's also UTF-16, 32, so forth. We already have the action, we have autocomplete, we have insight. Insight means that the data should be encoded when submitting it to the server. And this is only useful for a post. So in our example, if we take a look at the insight attribute, we would use insight for things like whether the form contained files. Maybe you have an image that you're going to upload, or a sound binary file or whatever, right? So the insight is important for those types of file uploads. It takes all of the data and it hashes it so that it can be streamed in a more efficient manner. Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions? All right. Let's go ahead and go back then. We have, right now on our form, we have a target for CGI results. We have autocomplete on. I'm going to take the autocomplete out for right now so we have a little cleaner view of our code. So now it's time to actually think about some of the form elements. So what type of form elements would we want to do? Well, HTML offers you some ways of organizing your form elements. So let's start out with a field set. I'm going to type field set here, and inside this field set, the field set itself can take a number of different options. So in our field set, we would typically use some type of a legend that's associated with it. So we're going to go ahead and have our field set, and in our legend field, we're going to type, let's see, if we're looking at the grouping of our data, we'll just say name information. We'll save that. Let's go back over to our web page and refresh it. And we can see that we now have this field set that wraps around data that we might want to put on it, right? So let's go ahead and add a few web forms now. Let's first of all, underneath our legend, go ahead and create an input. And we're going to specify a type of text. Okay. When you're submitting data with a post or a get, you need to specify a name attribute. The name attribute will actually be part of the parameters that specify the key value pairs that are passed along in the post or the get. Now, if I make this a get and I submit this, what I would have is first name and then the value of the first name. Just so you could see it, let's do that for a moment. We'll refresh this. Actually, hang on. Input, submit. There we go. Okay. Michael and submit. So there we go. You can see it echoed the data back inside of our iframe. But let's take a look at the network panel, and we're going to do this again. And notice what it did. We have our action, right? Here is our action. And it used the query string parameterization because it is a get call. So I'm submitting everything right out in the open, right? And of course you can see there's the request method. We get a status code of 200 that it means that it hit the location, the external website, and returned it. All right? But you guys see what I'm talking about right here, right? There is the question mark that specifies the beginning of a query string parameter. And the first parameter in my query string is first name, which if you remember, it aligns to the name of the input. Okay, you guys see that? All right, so if we do this as a post, I'm going to refresh it, type in my name again, and submit again. It's submitted again, but this time we don't see it appended to the query string because it's a post. And if you actually wanted to see the payload, you could come over here and look at the form data, or you could look at the the parse data. It might be better to do this through like a curl, but I'm not going to teach you all that for right now. That's kind of out of the scope. But the point is that with our post, it has sent the data as a package that's not in clear scope. It's not in clear text for everyone to see. Do you guys understand? Okay, so let's go back again to our form. We have the input. We have the first name. Let's go ahead and add another input. And this again is text. Now we're going to say name equals last name. We'll save it. Let's go back again and refresh. Now, can you all tell me a problem that you might be seeing so far? Do you really know, without looking at the code, which one is the first name and which one is the last name? Right? I mean, you guys know, of course, how to go in here and inspect and go, okay, well, okay, that's the first name and that's the last name. But will your users know how to do that, right? And do you really want them to learn how to drill down and inspect a page to figure out what the attributes are? We don't really expect them to do that, do we? So this gets to the next part of our layout. Yes, of course, we have a field information, we have a legend that specifies, but what we don't have is an actual label. So let's go ahead and right above our first name, we're going to create a label. And the label has automatically here a for text. And we're going to talk about what that is in just a moment. But for the label, we'll just put first name like that. If we go back up here and refresh, well, now there's a first name. Now we kind of contextually, we know what that means. Let's do it again. We'll copy this, paste it here, but now we'll say last name and refresh it. Whoops. Save it first, then refresh. And now we have our first name and our last name. Makes sense, right? It kind of contextually, it lays the information out, we understand. But we also have this attribute here, and the for attribute is meant to connect to the ID of the input. So we don't have an ID on our input, so we have a name, so I'm just going to say ID, and I'm going to give it the same as my name attribute. And down here I'll do ID, give it the same as my name attribute here, last name. Now in the for, what I want it to do is I want this for label to be specified exactly for one ID. So let me demonstrate by doing this wrong. I'm going to do it in opposite fashion. This is the wrong way. Now if I save that, I come up here and I refresh, and I click on first name, what happened? Click on first name and I start, oh, no. I want first name, right? I click on again. I've flip-flopped the labels, the for attributes, and because I do that, it's connected to the wrong input. So you always want to remember that your for attribute on your label needs to be connected to the ID of the input. And this brings up an important topic for IDs. An ID is unique. It may get easy to think, well, when we're creating our CSS class names and our IDs, that we could just use them all interchangeably. But realistically, just like your name, your ID should be unique to your name, right? There may be two Michaels in this room, but we both have unique IDs, right? There may be more than one John in this room, but your ID should be unique. And it's the same way on an HTML page. For every HTML page that you create, that ID should be unique to that page. Okay? You may in the future think, well, I need to add another ID for another name. Well, make sure you specify if it's unique, like if it's a parent name. Make sure you say in the ID that this is parent first name, or guardian first name, or child first name, right? Always keep it unique for your IDs. All right, so we're going to save it. We'll refresh this. Now when I click on first name, it gives me the link. I can tab over and automatically it tabs to the next. I can click on the last name and it selects it, right? And whoops, not save here. We're going to go ahead and click submit again. And if we're paying attention to the network, we can see that it submitted the data. The CGI code there, it sent it back to us and it told us the attributes, the name attributes that it submitted. Okay, so that handles first name and last name. But there are also other types of inputs you could use. For example, if we go over here and we look at let's see, where's the input at? Have a good one. The session will be recorded, and so you should be able to get it later tonight. Yep. For the inputs, we have a number of different types of inputs. So all of these inputs here, they use the text. But you'll notice this one down here has a different type of input, which is submit. And the input then is actually understood, or it's interpreted on the screen when it's of type submit to be a button. We're going to show you some other ways to create buttons later, but for right now, this is the simplest way. When you have a submit button inside of a form, that is the element that kicks off and calls this action and passes along a collection of data by key value pair. The key is the name attribute, the value is what is ever stored in the value. All right, so let's look at the other options for types you have. You got a lot. There's a lot of them. You have button, you have checkbox, you have color, you have date, date time local, email, file, hidden, image, month, number, password, radio, range, reset, right? Telephone, text, which is the default value, time, URL, and week. When I first started coding, I only had just a couple of these. There was only a couple that we could use. There was text, there was button, there was password, submit, and that was about it. Everything else we had to programmatically create. So you know all those forms where you create a date field? We had to write code to create that, just so we could take the data, send it in the text field, and submit it. Right? Gone are those days. Hallelujah. You don't have to do that anymore. Now we actually, every browser supports date and date time local. So let's go ahead and take a look at another one of these. And the one we're going to look at is actually the email. Okay? So we'll go ahead and go back into our form. We're going to create another field set. Inside that, we'll create another legend. And we're going to, in this legend, we're going to store email and phone information. So what should we call this legend? What is the label we should put here? Perfect. Contact information. All right, we'll save it. Let's go back to our page, refresh it again. Now we got our contact information. All right. Underneath our input, let's go ahead and do, underneath our legend, let's go ahead and create our input. And I'm going to go ahead and use Imit's abbreviation ability here to, within Visual Studio Code, to set the type. All right. So the type here is email, and we could use any number of emails, right? We could have work email, we could have personal email, whatever. For simplification, for our purposes, just for this assignment, my name attribute and the ID attribute is going to be basically the same as the type attribute. Okay, so I'm going to come back here, refresh it, and now we have our email. And you can see right away, Chrome has recognized this, and it said, you know what, your email would actually be perfect for this because we recognize this to be an email field. It doesn't do that for up here though, does it? Because the browser recognizes it, reads the code you've written, and it knows what is a text field and what is an email field. All right, same thing as before. Let's go ahead and create a label. And the for attribute is going to be email, and my label itself is going to be email. I will save that, refresh it. It seems to be working okay. Let's test it again. Submit it, and it's echoing the data back. All right. Let's go back again. we need to also add what? A phone number. So let's go ahead and add our label first. We're going to use telephone. And I'll say this is phone. And our input is going to be of type tel. And so for the name, I'm going to use, I'm going to spell it out just because maybe it's a little too much, but I'm just going to do it like that. Okay, I'm going to refresh it. Now we got first name, email, and phone. And you can honestly put anything you want in there as long as it's a number. And you can even type, right? The benefit of the phone, let's take a look at the type itself. There is no given specification here for why telephone is important. It doesn't lock numerics. It doesn't lock, a certain pattern. But remember, everything that we're doing in HTML is about semantics, right? We're semantically annotating the fields and the information on our page to match as close as we can reality. And so we use the type tel because that's the type that's set aside for telephones. Okay, so we've got that. What is the next item that we need to add here? Any ideas? We're looking at our homework. We have birth date. Okay, so I'm going to create another field set, another legend, and I'll call this legend birthday. Oops. Okay. We'll create a label, and I'm just going to say DOB is going to be the ID for that. We're going to say in here, we're going to say date of birth for the label. And we're going to do the input of type date. And I'm going to have my the for attribute of the label match both the name and the ID. So I'm going to use DOB for both of those. Okay, let's go back to our page again. I'm going to refresh this. And now we have the date of birth set. And this is so cool to me, okay? I'm going to tell you, this is just absolutely fantastic. Last year, when I was teaching this class, they had not yet situated the date type as supported in all browsers. So the way that you had to get around this was use JavaScript. And there were different scripts that you could use that would take a date field and add the widget to it through JavaScript. But now that you have this is just fantastic to me. I love the fact that we have this. Let's take a look at what this page looks like in Chrome, though, to get an idea. Excuse me, not Chrome, Safari. I'm going to go back to Chrome real quick here, grab my URL and paste it in. Yep. And here, the widget is a little bit different, right? because it matches the way Safari does it as compared to Chrome, right? Now, if by chance you still want to have your widget, your date time widget, look the same no matter in what browser you're in, you can still accomplish that through through a JavaScript library, okay? And if we go out here and we take a look, let's do this in Chrome just for benefit here. We'll just say JavaScript date widget. There's a number of them that are available, and they're not all of that too difficult to include if you want it to always look the same. If it doesn't matter to you or doesn't matter to your site, then just stick with what is necessary. Now, when it comes to date time or the time widget or date time local, we'll have to take a look because I'm not sure if that is yet supported across all browsers and all devices. But we'll find out in a moment. Let's see, while we're waiting here, let's go ahead and go back. And I'm just going to do a search here. HTML, date, time, input, browser, support. Let's see. This is interesting. This was 8 years ago, so I think this is probably outdated. So yeah, I'm not sure of the site that I'm looking for here. Anyways, these are yeah, let's see, JavaScript date widget. Yeah, so this is another example of a date widget you could use. This is written in JavaScript. These are some that you might find like on United when you're trying to buy your tickets. You have to select between multiple dates. There's a lot of features that are still not included in HTML, and so for those types of data gathering widgets, form elements, you have to go out to third party and include the scripts on your page and so forth. And as you can see here, they're using jQuery. jQuery is a very common library. It works, what it does is it takes all of the boilerplate effort across all browsers and it gives you a single type of code you have to type. We'll be getting into a little bit of JavaScript and all of that later on. But as you can see, here's some examples using a date range picker, right? It's actually pretty nice, and it defaults to the to text on submit. Okay. Any questions so far with what we've done? All right. So we've got first name, So in Chrome, it looks like it gives me all of this. It's going to autofill it for me. And then we have our date, right? And so we could click submit, and submit is going to take that data and submit the information. All right. Let's go back to our form again. And this time I want to go to the Chrome view of this. Everything so far is laid out with our field sets in a very basic manner, right? It makes sense. But what we have down here at the bottom is our submit button, and it's just kind of hanging out there. So what we want to do is go ahead and wrap it as well inside of a field set. And we'll just take this, we'll throw it in, save it, and refresh, right? Pretty basic. Let's go back to our form though. Right now, all of the data pretty much just wraps inside of the field set. Now there's different ways we could do this with CSS. We could use a flex grid. We could use flex, or we could use grid, or we could use any number of ways for laying this out. Let's simplify it for a moment and just put a break line. Okay, we'll put a break line there. We'll put a break line on our email. We'll save that and refresh. So now it's laid out more in a horizontal fashion. Okay. Guys, any questions so far? All right. So if we're going back to the work we've done, let's go ahead and do a git add to stage all of our changes to our local repository. Git commit -m, the message that we're going to commit with. We have updated our local form, web form. Hit enter. Now we've committed all of that information into our local Git. Now we need to push it to our repo. Okay, everything is pushed. Let's go back to GitHub, and we'll just click on our web form. We can see it was just updated. And there's all of our code so far. Okay. Let's see here real quick. Last thing we want to do to our form we have this layout, but there are a couple of other features that we can apply to our web forms. One of them is default values, and the other is placeholders. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have here. So far we have our ID, we have a first name. Let's say that we don't have a label, and we want to we just want to use a placeholder data. Okay, so what we would put here is, please type your first name. Let's refresh it, hit enter, and we have now placeholder data on the form. We also have this thing called area placeholder. Let's do that and refresh it. And you notice that it takes away what was there before. Area placeholder is basically for those who are visually impaired, who cannot see the data per se. The area placeholder becomes the key element that is read for the visually disabled. Okay, those who cannot see. So if we don't have the label, the recommendation is that you use the area placeholder. So we have this on the page, and one of our problems here is that we really can't see all of the text. So I'm going to go ahead and just apply a width, and I'm going to say 200 pixels. Let's do it this way. Ay. Is width. We'll just do it this way for right now. Class, we're going to say name info and name info. We're going to give a width of 300 pixels. There we go. So we've increased the width now of our widget. If we wanted to inspect that, of course, we could come over here and click on it, and it's going to highlight, of course, what the width is on it. We're going to do the same thing for the ID, so I'm just going to apply the class. Save that, refresh it. Now we have this information is both laid out for us. Add our placeholder. Okay. Save it. Now we have our placeholders in this location, right? Let's add some other placeholder information down here on our email. Input your email address. Right? And contact info. We're going to say width of 300 px as well. Set up our class. Contact info. All right. Let's go ahead and add a placeholder on our phone. Right? All right, so this is some of the ways that we can actually specify the data. Other things that you can actually use here, you can specify a title. And we could say title is input your email address. Make it look right. And what happens is when we hover over the email, the title will show. Right? These are all different methodologies and things that we could input here. Let's go ahead and add one more date item, but I'm going to change this to basically say date information in the legend. I'm going to use a break tag here, add another label, today, and today's date. The input is going to be of type date, and we'll call this today. We'll save that, refresh. Now we've got date information, right? We got today's date. I believe, let's see here, let me look it up. HTML date set year. Yeah. Yep, okay. So we can add the max and the min to some of this information. So we could say the date of birth must have a minimum date of, if this is 2022, let's say that the minimum date is 1923. And max is 2022. So see if it'll block it. No, it's not going to block it, but there should be I think it's because we have to have, is it cannot remember. HTML form attributes validate. Okay. So we have the required attribute. I might have to look this up for you all yet. I think if we do this, and refresh it, submit, there we go. So the required is going to set it for us. So that's the other attribute that's important. When you set the required Boolean flag on your fields, that will force these to be filled out. So if we refresh it and click submit, you can see that this field has to be submitted. Yeah. Let's do this. Michael, submit. Yeah, it's going to list them in order of precedence. Okay. Last thing was default values. I was hoping to set the default value here. I'm forgetting the command. Let me look it up again. Okay. Required default value is 2022-11- what is today? The third?
Third.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that date value format will work. Yeah, because it's set up differently. You have to set the default value in terms of the format that's used, and I'm not sure what that is. But if we go up here to say telephone, and we set a default value of 670 322 3320 and refresh. Did I save it? Somehow it feels like that's not the right. Let's look that up. HTML input default value. What is the attribute? You guys have a quicker search engine than I do. Let me know. Placeholder. I don't think it's I don't think it's value. I may be wrong. That's the JavaScript. Maybe I am wrong. It is value. I thought there was a special one for that. Let's see. Refresh this again. There we go. So that is the correct syntax. So if you want the value to be defaulted, you just use the value command for that. All right. And then what have we not covered yet? Because there's going to be a lot we cover next week in laying out your forms. You can use the grid view, you could use the flex. All of those are valuable for laying out your form. What I do want to make highlight of here before we go any further is that when you're laying out your forms, think about doing it in a manner that goes from top to bottom. You may be looking at your form and thinking, well, when I create this, it's easy enough for me to go first name and then over here and then over here and over here, keep going to the right. The problem with that is that when we look at things in a perspective, you want to keep the field of vision in a very narrow spot where the eyes will automatically drift down. This has to do more with human-computer interactions and the way that your eyes actually work. You can, if you want to, make all of your forms go way out to the right, just like you do on paper, but I bet you end up being confused and overwhelmed when you look at forms that are laid out that way, because there's just so much information that they try to cram onto a sheet of paper. One of the other things that you can actually do with these as well, with your forms, is set up the tab index. So tab index is basically an attribute, and you specify the tab index as I'm doing right now. It's pretty much numeric. So when you hit tab, it's going to go in the order that you have it on the page. But let's say that for some reason you want your tab index to focus first on today's date. I don't know why you would want to go to the end of the page, but you could. So you could have, say, 0. Let's just make that 3. We'll refresh the form. I tab. Whoops. And you notice is jumping down. What did I set these up here to? First name. Let's go into email. Tab index of of 5. Tab index of 4. Tab index of 6. Let's see if it follows the pattern we give it now. So we'll tab. There you go. So 1, it's going down to there. Let's give this tab index of 7. Refresh it. There you go. So you can set your tab indexes as well. All right. I think that pretty much covers it for today. Any questions on the assignment?